Well, hey there, I'm Dr. Tom Ulrich, and I like to talk about leadership and engineering. But since I got these two little guys here, I'm also going to talk about Scrum. Hey, in today's video, what I'd like to talk about is the Scrum Master. What is the Scrum Master? So, in fact, I'll answer three questions. What is the Scrum Master? What are the responsibilities of a Scrum Master? And what are the qualities we look for when we select a Scrum Master? And as kind of a bonus thing, I'm also going to add some factors that I think sometimes make Scrum Masters unsuccessful. At any rate, in terms of what is a Scrum Master, I'm going to go back to Schwaber's original book on the topic, and he writes this. He says, "Why did I choose a strange name like Scrum Master? I wanted to highlight the extent to which the responsibilities of a Scrum Master are different from those of a traditional project manager." And then he goes on to say, you see, the Scrum Master is only a facilitator. And so what do they do then? Well, the 12-page position paper by Schwaber, he says, the main thing a Scrum Master does is they help the Scrum team adhere to Scrum values, practices, and rules. And then he also clarifies. He says, the Scrum Master does not manage the team. They're not a manager. See, and that's important because the concept of Scrum is that the team is self-organizing. And if you have a manager in the traditional sense, that's the opposite of self-organizing. See, a manager kind of, organizes the team sort of in a top-down fashion, but the idea of self-managing is the team organically kind of figures things out. Now, a related question is Scrum Master a full-time job? A lot of the times when you read these folks, they kind of talk like it is, and I think that's a fairly common practice, just like having a program manager is kind of a full-time thing. But Schwaber does point out, he says it's not necessarily a full-time job. Actually, I think it's Ken Rubin who says it's not necessarily a full-time job. And, the factor seems to be how experienced is the team. I mean, the more experienced of a team you have, the less the Scrum Master is going to have to do. And nonetheless, when we look at these definitions of a Scrum Master and really the responsibilities and the qualities, what I think you'll see is generally when you're talking about a Scrum Master, you're talking about a fairly senior role. So a very common mistake I've seen at companies I've worked at is, it's sort of like, oh, okay, who's going to be the Scrum Master? And you kind of delegate that down to the new guy. And that's really a bad idea. And I think that'll become clear here in a second. All right, so what are the roles? What are the responsibilities of a Scrum Master? Well, Ken Rubin really fleshes that out real nice, and Schwaber's book has got just a few words. He's actually got a whole chapter on it. But one thing he says, first and foremost, the Scrum Master is a coach. So they're sort of coaching the team, and that isn't necessarily in relation to Scrum. Now, he also says that the Scrum Master is a process authority. So the idea there is, they can speak with authority on how Scrum works. They have a fundamental understanding of what Scrum is and how it works. But this coach thing is a little bit broader. It's not just process. It can be, on the software methodology or just whatever, but it's coaching. Now, the second thing Rubin says is Scrum is a servant leader. Now, that's actually a really great comment. And I made the comment in an earlier video that the Scrum sort of emerged at the same time as a lot of these modern leadership paradigms. And what I wanted to do is show you this book here. If you're wondering what is servant leadership, this is the definitive book. It's by Robert Greenleaf. I'll have a link down below. But it's a really good book, and this fleshes this idea out as well as anything. And, the long and the short of it is, in servant leadership, you sort of flip the paradigm. In traditional leadership, it's sort of like the people exist for the leader. The people are there to do the leader's bidding and so on. But in servant leadership, Greenleaf kind of asks the question, well, what if the leader existed for the people? What if the leader's role was to enable the people and empower them and train them and do all these things that make them the best version of themselves? So that's a really a good book, and sort of in terms of getting your mind frame right, I think understanding servant leaderships really will help you understand Scrum. So another thing the Scrum Master does is they are what Ruben calls an interference shield. So the idea is if you've got somebody wanting to distract the team and looking for somebody to head up some committee or whatever, it's kind of the idea of the Scrum Master is to protect the team. And I kind of get the idea of when you see bicycle racers, there'll be like 4 in a row and on the same team, and the guy in the front's kind of taking all the wind. And what they do on those teams is they sort of switch who's in the front, because the guy who's in front has to work harder, and he's allowing the other people to draft, and he sort of aerodynamically protects them. And I think the Scrum Master is a lot like that, where the Scrum Master's taken some of the aerodynamic pressure that would otherwise hit the team. The Scrum Master is an impediment remover. So, when we talk about the daily Scrum, when somebody says, well, I have a roadblock, the Scrum Master's ears perk up, and, now their big priority is to fix that roadblock. And finally, Ruben describes the Scrum Master as a sort of a change agent, and just sort of setting the tone for the team feeling free to think about things different and change things up. Now notice when we think about all these things: coach, servant leader, process authority, interference shield, impediment remover, and change agent. That's not a junior role. You can't just say, oh, give this to the new guy. I mean, that just kind of reduces the whole role to a joke. It really is a senior role. All right, so then in addition to saying what the responsibilities are, Ruben also says, well, what qualities do we look for? What kind of person do we want to be a Scrum Master? And he says, well, it's got to be somebody who's knowledgeable. So, if it's a software team, it's got to be someone who's knowledgeable in software. It's got to be someone who by nature sort of questions things. They don't just tend to accept things. They tend to kind of, well, could there be a better way? He makes the interesting comment that the ideal Scrum Master is very patient. The ideal Scrum Master is by nature collaborative, so it's not the kind of guy that generally has a lot of conflict. It's the kind of person that's really leaning in toward making people want to work together. They're protective of the team, and I think that's very similar to the interference shield. And I think another thing that's very, very important is, a big part of Scrum is providing transparency. Is with Scrum, you can see the actual process of the team or progress of the team. And it's very important to have a Scrum Master who's got a mind frame of, let me show the rest of the company where we're at. Let me really give some visibility, so when they're doing burn downs, they're not committed to, dry labbing and make the burn down look perfect. They're really trying to use all these methods to communicate true status. All right, and finally then I would add some things. The previous 3 here are pretty much all in the Scrum books. I mean, my extra little bit about servant leadership, that I added that. But this last one, I guess 2 of these are in Schwaber's book, but I'm going to add a little bit to it. So, the things that make Scrum Masters fail, I would say, is insufficient training. And, I would say as a minimum, if you make somebody a Scrum Master, they need to have read this book, Ruben's book. I would propose you have a book club, and what we do is, I've done this a lot over the years at Tandem, where we say, okay, this week we're reading chapter 1. You get everybody their own copy. I recommend when you buy them the book that you say, look, this is our gift to you. So like when you leave the company, you don't have to give it back. And so it kind of makes it a gift. It feels a little more personal. And I find that really helps with people taking it seriously, and they can feel free to make notes and whatnot. And these aren't real expensive. This is not like a $200 textbook or something, so it's reasonable. But we would say, okay, next week we're going to read chapter 1, and then everybody marks it up. We get together in 30 minutes or an hour or whatever, and you say, okay, what did you see? What caught your attention? What did you highlight? What did what do you want to talk about? And do that each week until you work all the way through the book. So at Tandem, I in the last year started a new group called the Scientific Computing Group, and it's all. Everybody in the group except for me was in college a year ago, and so got all these new people, really talented, great degrees, PhDs, masters, the whole deal, but they're having to learn how do we do these things. And it was really helpful just simply to go through, and smart group, questioned a lot of things, and really came away, I think, with a deep understanding. Of course, the best bet is to have your people trained and certified. You know, I'm a big fan of Mike Cohn. My puppets' names are Mike, Nike and Cohn. But you know, he's the guy that knows what's up, and you know, it's a little bit expensive, and maybe if your company's a startup, you haven't got any money for now. Read the book, but set the goal that you want to get your people trained. And you know, on that subject, I've experienced something a couple times in my career which was really lame. Um, I well, when I went to work at Delphi Engineering, I was first using an operating system called SPOX. It was kind of a specialized thing for using DSPs, digital signal processors, in parallel. And I had a boss who, um, you know, the people we had the contract for said, "Hey, you need to take some training in this." And so he decided what he would do is he would take the training, even though I'm doing the work. And so he goes for a week, gets all this training, comes back, hands me the notes from the course, and says, "We'll just figure it out." I mean, that is really ridiculous. So what you want to do is um, the person who's gonna be the Scrum Master needs to get that training. Now, if you're the boss and you want to also get it, then okay, pay for you both. But make sure the person doing the work. Second time this happened, I was working on F-35 as a contractor at Parker Hannifin, and they wanted me to do some stuff using doors. It was just this big, burdensome program that's conceptually a good idea, but a horrible imitation of sort of managing requirements. And very complicated, very overly complicated, overly difficult. And same thing, they had the boss go to the training, but they had me do the work. And what is that? You know, the person doing the work needs to get the training. I would say another thing that can make Scrum Masters fail is insufficient experience. And I said this before, but it was really worth repeating. This is a senior role, and don't try to put a junior person in a senior role. That ends badly. And the final thing I'd say is excessive zeal. I've seen that go bad a couple of times on other teams where, you know, somebody gets announced as the Scrum Master, and again, what they did is they picked a junior person, you know, year out of college, and they tell him he's a Scrum Master, and all of a sudden he's like mad with power. You know, when you're a Scrum Master, you're not the boss. You can't tell anybody what to do. You're not a manager. It's not a managerial role. Nobody works for you. You're a coach, you're a facilitator. It's all by personal influence. And I've seen that where people just kind of go mad with power and think it's something much more than it is. You don't have a license to kill. You don't have a license to all of a sudden be mean to your team. You don't have a license to create conflict with the rest of the organization. And it's just very important to understand is you're not responsible for the team. It's not your team. You are the Scrum Master for that team, but the team is self-organizing. The team is entirely responsible as a group. Your job is to help them, but it's not like you're you know, you and you alone, or the supreme leader or something. And a final thing I'd say is lacking humility, you know, where it's kind of related to the going mad with power. There's a great book called Humble Inquiry by Edgar Schein. He taught at MIT's Sloan School of Business for like 47 years, but great author. But it's an easy book to read. It's like 100 pages, is like $12 on Amazon, but it's well worth your money. I'll put the link down there. But you know, I think it's an important role, but a little bit of humility goes a long way as a Scrum Master. At any rate, hopefully that helped. I'm Dr. Tom Ulrich. I'm the engineering leadership guy. You can find more videos at tomulrichconsulting.com, and on YouTube you can search on Dr. Tom Ulrich, and that should find me. At any rate, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.